The emperor had carefully selected several noble young ladies for the crown prince Peiheng, yet he insisted on choosing his crown princess by drawing lots. By chance, my father discovered that the lot pot had been tampered with. He secretly swapped it back to its original state, and in the end, it was I who drew the winning lot and married into the Eastern Palace. I thought my years of unrequited love had finally been rewarded, only to be plunged into a nightmare of unspeakable agony. On the day his concubine Wan Li died from lingering melancholy, Peiheng burst into my chambers, dead drunk, his eyes bloodshot with hatred. Su Wanyue, if you hadn't switched the name slips back then, Leah would have been my legitimate wife. She wouldn't have wasted away to death. It's all your fault. As his icy fingers clamped around my throat, I finally understood. From the moment I'd drawn that lot, my tragic fate had been sealed. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back on the very day of the lot-drawing ceremony to choose the crown princess. I jolted awake, cold sweat soaking my back, my legs nearly buckling beneath me. The suffocating sensation of being strangled still lingered, leaving me disoriented, unable to tell dream from reality. "Miss, what's wrong with you?" My maid Ginkgo rushed to support me, her voice laced with worry. I dug my nails deep into my palm. The sharp pain jolted me fully awake. Lifting my head, I saw my father, the Minister of Rites, about to step into the main hall for one final check before the ceremony began. "Father," I hurried forward, clutching the sleeve of his robe. "Wanyue," he turned around, a flicker of confusion crossing his brows. "Why are you in such a panic?" I leaned in close, whispering a few words in his ear. My father's brow furrowed deeply. "Are you certain?" I stared straight into his eyes and nodded solemnly. Father gave me a long, meaningful look. He didn't ask any further questions and finally nodded in agreement. "Your Highness, perhaps I shouldn't participate in such an occasion." A soft, delicate voice drifted over from behind me. I turned around and saw Wan Li gently tugging at Peiheng's sleeve, her eyes reddened, looking utterly pitiful and vulnerable. Peiheng's brows instantly knit together. "What's the matter? I'm of humble birth. If I draw the winning lot, people will surely say your Highness is showing favoritism. If I don't." Her voice trailed off, and she suddenly choked up. "I'm afraid I won't be able to bear the ridicule from others." As she spoke, her slender figure swayed slightly, as if about to collapse. Peiheng immediately reached out to support her by the waist. "With me here, who dares to laugh at you?" Peiheng's voice was cold and stern, but his gaze was impossibly gentle. Wan Li leaned against his arm naturally, but her eyes darted over his shoulder, shooting me a triumphant glance. "How about?" She suddenly straightened up, feigning innocence as she looked at me, a mocking smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "How about your Highness directly chooses Sister Su as the crown princess? After all, who in the capital doesn't know she's been in love with you for years, going to the Eastern Palace every day to bring you soup?" The noble young ladies around us all tittered behind their sleeves, their gazes flicking over me deliberately. In my past life, I would have been overcome with shame and anger at this moment, but now, I simply smiled calmly, lowering my eyes and saying nothing. When Peiheng heard this, he also shot me a cold, indifferent glance. Let fate decide. In truth, Wan Li was not a noble lady, she was the daughter of a hunter. During the autumn hunt last year, Peiheng had fallen off his horse and been injured in the mountains. She had saved him and nursed him back to health for 3 whole days. After returning to the palace, Peiheng had insisted on keeping her by his side, even wanting to make her his legitimate wife at one point. A hunter's daughter, how dare she dream of being crown princess? The emperor had flown into a rage, smashing his teacup to the ground. "Hunger, don't be muddle-headed." Later, the emperor had carefully selected several noble young ladies for Peiheng, but he had insisted on choosing his wife by drawing lots and had stubbornly demanded that Wan Li be added to the list of candidates. He had knelt outside the imperial study all night long, until the emperor finally relented. "Since you are so insistent, then let her join the selection. If she fails to draw the lot, then it is the will of heaven." The ceremony began. The Master of Rites chanted loudly, "Please, your Royal Highness the Crown Prince, draw the lot for your legitimate wife." Peiheng strode forward, reached out his hand, and drew a slip from the gilded lot pot, handing it to the Master of Rites. The Master of Rites announced in a booming voice, "Lady Wan Li is chosen as the Crown Princess." An uproar erupted in the hall, with everyone whispering and discussing heatedly. Ruan Li covered her mouth with her hand, tears glistening in her eyes. Your Highness, is this truly the will of heaven? Pei Heng's eyes were filled with doting affection. It is truly a blessing bestowed by heaven. Sister Su, I never expected this would happen. Ruan Li turned to me, her gaze flickering between Pei Heng and me. Your Highness, how can I possibly deserve the position of Crown Princess? Why not give it to Sister Su instead? Fate has spoken, how can we treat it as a trifle? Pei Heng shot me a pointed look. Su Wanyue has her own destiny to fulfill. When Ruan Li heard this, a flash of triumph flickered in her eyes. She put on a look of delicate frailty and said, You're right, Your Highness, I was being foolishly simplistic. She coughed lightly behind her sleeve, looking as if she was about to faint at any moment. Please, Your Royal Highness, draw the lot for your secondary consort. When the Master of Rites held up the jade lot pot, my heart skipped a beat violently. This part had never happened in my past life. Before I could recover my wits, Pei Heng had already hurried over to Ruan Li's side. What's wrong? Have you been standing for too long? When Ruan Li nodded, Pei Heng swept her up in his arms. Li Dequan, you draw the lot. With that, he turned and walked toward the back of the hall without a second glance. After Pei Heng left, Li Dequan, the head eunuch, drew a slip and handed it to the Master of Rites, who announced loudly, Lady Chu Wn is chosen as the secondary consort. The young lady from the Chu family standing beside me fell to her knees in joyful surprise, kowtowing to thank the Crown Prince. The other noble young ladies all wore expressions of disappointment. After the ceremony ended, the young ladies left in groups of 2 or 3, some deliberately walked past me, their voices dripping with malice. Some people have been dreaming foolishly for years, only to end up with nothing, not even a position as secondary consort. That's right, she ran to the Eastern Palace every day, fawning over him like a fool. Now it's all for nothing, like drawing water with a bamboo basket. If you ask me, the Crown Prince must have grown sick and tired of her constant fawning a long time ago. Should keep your voice down. Her father is the Minister of Rites, after all. I let these sharp, spiteful words wash over me, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my lips. I had finally escaped this disaster. On the carriage back to the mansion, my father fell into deep thought for a long time before hesitating to speak up. Wanyue, I know you've loved the Crown Prince for a long time, and I never wanted you to marry into the Eastern Palace either. But why did you ask me to remove your name slip from the lot pot today? I lifted the carriage curtain, gazing at the palace walls growing farther and farther away, and said softly, It's nothing, father, I just suddenly don't want to marry him anymore. I let the curtain fall back into place, turned to my father, and smiled lightly. You and mother have always said that General Lu Jr. would be a good match for me, haven't you? I've made up my mind, I agree to this marriage. When father heard this, he froze for a moment, then patted the back of my hand with relief. Good, good, I'll go give the Lu family my reply at once. My infatuation with Pei Heng was probably the biggest joke among the noble ladies of the capital. I was 7 years old when I was chosen to be a companion to the princess and entered the palace. The first time I was to meet the emperor, I had been so terrified that I'd huddled behind a vermilion corridor pillar, trembling and shedding tears. Why are you crying? A young boy's voice sounded above me. Pei Heng stood there, backlit by the sunlight, his features as handsome as a painting. Now that you're in the palace, I'll look after you from now on. With that, he pulled a piece of sweet candy from his sleeve and pressed it into my palm. The candy was sickeningly sweet, but it had made me stop crying and break into a smile. From that day on, I'd followed him around like a little tail, from the imperial study to the martial arts training ground, through spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Once, the empress had seen us and joked with a smile, This little girl Wanyue is so fond of our hanger. I say, why don't we just let her be your wife in the future? Pei Heng's ears had turned bright red as he turned his face away in embarrassment, but I'd tucked those words away in my heart, cherishing them deeply. Later, when he'd casually praised the sweet candies from Li's confectionery, I'd woken up before dawn to queue up and buy them for him. When I'd heard that he often suffered from headaches and insomnia due to his heavy workload, I'd pored over medical books to learn how to make soothing soup, bringing it to him every single day. During the days when he'd fallen off his horse during the autumn hunt, I'd been so worried that I'd stayed awake for several nights, almost following his guards into the mountains to search for him. The Su family's young lady is waiting outside the Eastern Palace again, the legitimate daughter of a minister of rights, reducing herself to such a state. The entire capital had laughed at me, calling me foolish, calling me an idiot. But they didn't know that when Pei Heng had been delirious with a high fever that year, he'd mumbled my name, Ayu, clutching my hand tightly in his sleep. They also didn't know that on the day of my coming-of-age ceremony, he'd pressed his personal jade pendant into my hand, saying keep this safe. His eyes filled with gentle warmth. That ambiguous, on-again off-again affection had made me cling to this beautiful dream for a full 10 years, happy and content, until Wan Li had appeared. He'd started taking her in and out of the palace, teaching her to write and paint with his own hands, even giving her the pine soot ink that I'd given him as a gift to use. He'd rushed to summon imperial physicians personally, and even boiled medicinal herbs for her himself, just because she'd frowned slightly, clutching her chest in discomfort. He'd even knelt outside the imperial study all night long, just to beg for a chance for her to participate in the crown princess selection. I'd felt bitter and resentful in my heart. I'd been the one who'd met him first, so why could he only see Wan Li now, until the day of the lot-drawing ceremony in my past life, when Pei Heng had actually drawn my name. I'd knelt before the palace hall, weeping tears of joy, thinking that the Bodhisattva had heard my prayers and granted my wish at last. I hadn't noticed the way Pei Heng's expression had suddenly turned cold and gloomy on the high platform, as if he hadn't just drawn the name of his future wife, but a death warrant. I'd sewn my wedding dress with my own hands, filled with joy, but on our wedding night, he hadn't even lifted my red veil, only throwing down a cold, harsh sentence. You've gotten what you wanted, the title of crown princess is yours. As for anything else, don't even dream of it. With that, he turned and walked away. The red candles burned down to stubs. I'd sat alone in the empty chamber all night long. I hadn't understood. It had been the will of heaven, so why was Pei Heng treating me like this? The next day, a small sedan chair had been carried into the Eastern Palace. Wan Li had entered the mansion as Pei Heng's concubine. At the concubine acceptance ceremony, Wan Li had worn a water-red silk dress, her fingers trembling slightly as she held a teacup. This concubine offers tea to Her Royal Highness the Crown Princess. The teacup had crashed to the ground with a clatter, scalding hot tea soaking through her silk socks. She'd let out a cry of surprise, shrinking into Pei Heng's arms, revealing an ankle reddened by the scald. Su Wanyue. Pei Heng's face had darkened instantly, and he'd roared angrily, "Can't you even hold a teacup properly? You must have done this deliberately to make things difficult for Leah." I'd stared dumbfounded at the shards of porcelain still steaming on the ground. She'd clearly knocked the teacup over herself. "Your Highness, I'm innocent, I didn't." Pei Heng had cut me off, his anger flaring even hotter. "Are you saying Leah deliberately scalded herself? Unrepentant fool, go kneel outside and reflect on your actions." He'd swept Wan Li up in his arms, handling her with such extreme care, as if she were a precious, fragile treasure. Chaos had erupted in the Eastern Palace. Eunuchs had rushed to summon imperial physicians. Palace maids had scurried back and forth, carrying medicine boxes. I'd knelt on the bluestone bricks outside the hall, watching as the imperial physicians bustled about, fussing over that trivial, minor scald. My knees had gone numb from kneeling. When I'd finally returned to my chambers, I'd come down with a high fever. When Pei Heng had heard about it, he'd only sneered coldly, putting on a show. A few days later, the Empress had somehow learned that we hadn't consummated our marriage and had summoned Pei Heng to scold him. That night, he'd kicked open my door and grabbed me by the chin, his fingers digging into my skin. "How dare you complain to mother behind my back? Su Wanyue, you truly have some nerve. Fine. Then I'll give you what you want." Before I could even explain myself, he'd pinned me down on the bed. His movements were rough, as if punishing me. When he finished, he grabbed my chin and forced a bowl of contraceptive soup down my throat. "Remember this, you are not worthy of bearing my child." The medicine was bitter, dribbling from the corner of my mouth down my neck. I stared at the swaying tassels above the bed curtain and suddenly laughed out loud. So the Buddha had granted my wish after all, only to let me learn that a forced marriage could never lead to happiness. Later, I was banished to the most remote courtyard in the Eastern Palace. Pei Heng's heart and eyes were filled with no one but Wan Li. Wan Li was weak, so he ordered the finest tonics to be sent to her courtyard. Wan Li feared the cold, so he personally hunted a white fox to make her a fur coat. Then, Wan Li fell ill. The imperial physicians said her illness stemmed from pent-up grief and melancholy, an ailment that had lingered for too long to be cured. Pei Heng stayed by her bedside day and night, his eyes filled with a panic I had never seen before. He somehow obtained a folk remedy that required my blood as a medicinal guide to brew medicine for Wan Li. When he slit my wrist open, not a single eyelash of his fluttered. To save Wan Li, he drew blood from my wrist a total of 49 times. In the end, however, she still died. She passed away on the day the first snow fell that year, dying in his arms. That night, he kicked open the door to my chamber, reeking of alcohol, his eyes bloodshot with rage. Su Wanyue. If you hadn't switched the name slips back then, Leah would have been my primary consort. She wouldn't have wasted away to death from sorrow. It's all your fault. He clamped his hand around my neck, squeezing so hard he nearly crushed my windpipe. I opened my mouth in agony, but not a single sound escaped my lips. As I slipped into the dizzying darkness of suffocation, I finally understood everything. It turned out that his insistence on choosing a consort by drawing lots had been nothing but a scheme. Since Wan Li was of low birth, he had rigged the draw to give her a legitimate chance to be selected. He had already tampered with the lottery tube, only for my father to accidentally discover his trick and secretly switch the slips back to their original order. Because I was the one who had been chosen in the end, he had assumed that I had persuaded my father to interfere, robbing him and Wan Li of their chance to be together. That was why, in this second life, to avoid repeating the same tragedy, I had told my father not to meddle with the lottery tube. He only needed to remove my name slip from it. Since he had gone to such lengths for her, I might as well grant him his wish this time. 7 days after the grand ceremony, my mother entered my room holding a sandalwood box. She spread the marriage certificate and the list of betrothal gifts out on the table slowly. The smile played on her lips, clearly satisfied with this marriage alliance. That boy Lu Chen has a good character, and he has admired you for years. He is truly an excellent match. I lowered my eyes and smiled softly. Daughter will obey mother's arrangement, having lived a second life. I had grown weary of the entanglements of love and obsession. To marry someone who truly cared for me was already a blessing bestowed by heaven. If that person happened to treat me with sincerity, it would be an extra stroke of luck. Just as we were talking, Yinxing lifted the curtain and walked in. Miss, the splendid merchant house has just received a new shipment of fashionable jewelry. Would you like to go take a look? I nodded. Very well. I can also pick up the fabric I ordered the other day. As soon as I stepped into the shop, my eyes fell on a gilded kingfisher feather hairpin. What excellent taste, Miss Su. The shopkeeper carefully picked up the hairpin and held it out to me. This style was rushed here from Jiangnan by fast horse. You won't find another one like it in the entire capital. I took the hairpin and held it up to the bronze mirror to admire it. It is indeed exquisite. Wrap it up for me. I was about to pay when a cold, sharp voice suddenly sounded behind me. Su Wanyue. It has been a full 7 days. Where is the sleeping tonic you were supposed to brew for me? The bronze mirror reflected Pei Heng's tall, slender figure. His brows were tightly furrowed, and faint dark circles hung beneath his eyes. I pay my respects to your Royal Highness the Crown Prince. I turned around and curtsied. Your humble servant has been busy preparing for my wedding these days. I really haven't had the time. Pei Heng's gaze fell on the hairpin in my hand, and his expression suddenly softened a great deal. Oh, you've already started preparing so early. I was about to reply when Wan Li's delicate, soft voice suddenly cut in. Ah, this hairpin is so beautiful. Elder sister Su, she said, her eyes fixed eagerly on the hairpin in my hand. This hairpin is truly to my liking. I wonder if elder sister would be willing to part with it. I gently stroked the tassels hanging from the end of the hairpin. Miss Wan, when buying things, one must abide by the rule of first come, first served. I've already decided to buy this hairpin. Wan Li's eyes instantly reddened. She bit her lower lip and looked up at Pei Heng pleadingly. Your Highness. Pei Heng frowned and said in a deep voice, it's just a hairpin. If Leah likes it, you should just give it to her. Why must you be so petty about it? Seeing that I had no intention of giving in, he raised his hand and tossed a pouch of gold leaves onto the counter. I am determined to buy this hairpin today. Cold sweat broke out on the shopkeeper's forehead. He rubbed his hands together awkwardly, caught between a rock and a hard place. Not wanting to put the shopkeeper in a difficult position, I placed the hairpin back into its brocade box. Since your highness is so insistent, then I shall let you have it. The shopkeeper looked at me with gratitude. Miss Sue is here to pick up the fabric she ordered the other day, isn't she? He retrieved a bolt of bright red brocade embroidered with golden phoenixes from the cabinet. It's all ready, exactly according to your specifications. My fingertips had barely touched the smooth surface of the silk when Wan Li leaned in again. This red brocade is so beautiful. If it were made into a wedding dress, Miss Wan, why do you always covet what belongs to others? I cut her off coldly. This is the fabric I custom ordered for my wedding dress. I've already paid the deposit. Pei Heng had been standing by the side, watching coldly, but at my words, he suddenly lifted his eyes. His gaze fell on the bolt of bright red brocade embroidered with golden threads. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes, followed by a look of sudden realization. Su Wanyue, he curled his lips into a faint smile, a hint of amusement glinting in his eyes. When you marry into the Eastern Palace, you will only be a secondary consort. You have no right to wear such bright red. He paused, then added as if granting a great favor, however, if you like it, I will allow you to wear it once at a private banquet in the Eastern Palace in the future. Upon hearing this, Wan Li dug her fingernails sharply into the red brocade, but she did not dare to make a sound. She could only look at Pei Heng with a wronged expression. I'm afraid your highness has misunderstood. I smiled and stroked the golden phoenix patterns embroidered on the silk. When did I ever say I was going to marry into the Eastern Palace as a secondary consort? Pei Heng froze, the smile on his face vanishing instantly. What did you say? I met his gaze, speaking each word slowly and clearly. The man your humble servant is going to marry is Lu Chen, the son of General Ding Yuan. I will be carried to his mansion in a sedan chair lifted by 8 men, married with a formal matchmaker and proper rights as his primary wife. Pei Heng's pupils constricted sharply. He suddenly grabbed my wrist, squeezing so hard his fingers almost crushed my bones. That's impossible. I drew your name in the lottery. The Ministry of Rights has already recorded your name in the Imperial Jade Records. How dare you, your highness? Please watch your words. I wrenched my hand free from his grip forcefully. The secondary consort you drew in the lottery was clearly Miss Chu from the Chu family. Pei Heng's face turned deathly pale in an instant. He stumbled back half a step. No, that's impossible. It was as if something had suddenly dawned on him. He shouted loudly, someone, bring Li Dequan to me at once. It was only a moment before Li Dequan came scrambling over, tripping over his own feet in his haste. Before he could even stand steady, Pei Heng grabbed him by the collar. On the day of the consort selection, whose name was drawn for the position of secondary consort, speak, I reply to your highness. Li Dequan trembled like a leaf in the wind. It was the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Revenue, Chu Wn. You personally approved the memorial, your highness. What about Su Wanyue? Pei Heng's voice was hoarse with rage. Su. Li Dequan stole a glance at me, clearly confused. He could only force himself to answer, Miss Su. She was not selected at all. Pei Heng looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He froze completely, rooted to the spot. How could this be? Pei Heng muttered to himself, his gaze fixed on me. Dark and unfathomable, he stumbled as he walked away, the hem of his brocade robe catching on the threshold, causing him to stagger and nearly fall to the ground. Your highness. Wan Li hurried forward to support him as soon as she saw this, but the moment her fingertips touched the sleeve of his robe, she was roughly brushed aside. The force was so great that she stumbled back several steps, her back slamming hard against the door of the merchant house with a loud thud. The pain made her eyes redden, but she did not dare to step forward again. She could only clutch her handkerchief tightly and stand rooted to the spot, watching helplessly as Pei Heng walked away without looking back. In her tear-filled apricot eyes, a flash of venomous hatred suddenly flickered. That night, the Eastern Palace was bathed in bright candlelight throughout the night. The palace maids on night duty whispered tremblingly that the crown prince had flown into a violent rage for some unknown reason, smashing every piece of porcelain in the palace to smithereens. Early the next morning, Pei Heng suddenly burst into the Su mansion. His eyes were bloodshot, clearly showing that he had not slept a wink all night. The servants of the mansion did not dare to stop him. They could only watch helplessly as he strode straight into the backyard until he came to a stop right in front of me. Su Wanyue. He was out of breath, as if he had rushed here in a great hurry. "I went to see Father Emperor early this morning and obtained an imperial edict allowing me to take one more secondary consort." He lifted his chin slightly, as if this were an immense favor. "I intend to take you as my secondary consort, if you like. I can make an exception and allow you to enter the palace wearing bright red." "Your Highness is joking. Bright red is the color reserved for a primary wife's wedding ceremony. A secondary consort must never overstep her bounds by wearing it." I curtsied slightly in a gesture of respect. Pei Heng's eyes suddenly lit up. "Does this mean you've agreed?" "I'm afraid Your Highness has misunderstood. Your humble servant was merely discussing court etiquette with you." I raised my eyes to look at him, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Furthermore, I have already become engaged to Lu Chen." "That's impossible." He grabbed my wrist again, his voice rising sharply. "I don't believe it." I calmly pulled the gilded marriage certificate out of my sleeve and slowly unfolded it in front of his eyes. Pei Heng's pupils constricted sharply, his hand holding mine loosened involuntarily. He stumbled back half a step, his face turning paler and paler by the second. "How could this be?" he muttered to himself, then suddenly snatched the marriage certificate from my hand, flipping it back and forth repeatedly as if he expected to find some trace of forgery. "Su Wanyue." He suddenly looked up at me, a flash of panic crossing his eyes, but he quickly regained his usual condescending demeanor. "Even if you two are engaged, do you think Lu Chen can protect you? His father is nothing more than a mere military general. I am the crown prince of the current dynasty." "Your Highness. Please watch your words." I cut him off calmly, staring directly into his eyes. "The Lu family has produced 3 generations of loyal generals. Lu Chen's grandfather fought alongside Emperor Taizu to expand our borders and open up new territories. His father quelled the rebellion in the northern border, for which His Majesty personally bestowed upon him the title of General Dingyuan. By speaking such words just now, are you questioning His Majesty's judgment in granting this title?" His face froze, clearly not expecting me to invoke the Emperor's name. Just as the standoff intensified, my father hurried over. After bowing to Pei Heng, he said in a deep, stern voice, "I'm afraid it is inappropriate for Your Royal Highness the Crown Prince to break into the residence of a court official like this." Pei Heng snapped back to his senses and let out a cold snort. "The Minister of Rights certainly has a great deal of authority. Does he intend to reprimand me as well?" My father bowed respectfully, neither humble nor arrogant. "If Your Highness has business to discuss, you can send an official invitation to visit formally. Breaking in like this will only harm your reputation if word gets out." Pei Heng was left speechless, his expression alternating between anger and embarrassment. In the end, he flung his sleeves and stormed off, throwing a final threat over his shoulder as he left. "Su Wanyue, you will regret this." Only when he had walked far away did father heave a long sigh. He took out a handful of bamboo slips from a box in his study and handed them to me. "Actually, when I went to inspect the lot pots that day, I found that every single slip in the one for selecting the secondary consort bore your name. But your mother and I saw how hard it was for you to finally move on, and we didn't want you to waver again, so we never told you." I took the bamboo slips, my fingertips brushing over the 3 characters Su Wanyue written on them. A sudden chill ran down my spine. I knew that handwriting all too well. It was unmistakably Pei Heng's own. No wonder he had reacted the way he did yesterday, connecting all the strange things that had happened lately. I could be almost certain Pei Heng had been reborn too. But why? Why did he want to keep me by his side in this life? "Wanyue, will you blame us?" father called out, his voice laced with worry. I snapped out of my thoughts, clutched the bamboo slips tightly, and turned toward the tea stove by the window. "Don't worry, father, I won't be foolish ever again." I lifted the stove lid and tossed all the slips inside. The charcoal in the stove blazed fiercely, and the bamboo slips curled and turned black in the flames in an instant. After lunch, mother suddenly took my hand. "Wanyue, accompany me to the general's mansion today, will you? Lady Lu has just gotten some excellent Biluo-chun tea and specially sent an invitation for us to come and taste it." I froze for a moment, then nodded gently. "I'd love to go out for a stroll anyway, mother." I knew full well that this tea tasting was just an excuse to let me see that young General Lu in person. Though they had already arranged this marriage for me, they couldn't bear the thought of me marrying someone I knew nothing about. They always wanted me to see him for myself first, so that I could feel at ease with the match. As soon as we entered the mansion gate, Mother and Lady Lu exchanged a knowing glance and headed straight for the inner hall together, leaving Lu Chen to lead me to the back garden to admire the flowers. I had been mentally preparing myself to handle this awkward matchmaking meeting, but the moment I lifted my eyes, I froze. The young man standing before me wore an indigo silk robe, a white jade pendant hanging from his waist. He was so handsome and upright that he looked like he had stepped straight out of a painting. When he saw me, the tips of his ears turned bright red in an instant. He fumbled awkwardly with his bow of greeting, almost tripping over his own belt. Miss Su, it's an honor to meet you. He stumbled over his words, his eyes fixed firmly on the ground, too shy to look me in the face. I couldn't help but smile, pressing my lips together to hold back my amusement. Young General Lu. There's no need to be nervous, I don't bite. Only then did he lift his head, his clear eyes shining brightly, yet his cheeks were still flushed, making it look as if I had bullied him. Lu Chen and I talked in the garden for a long time, ranging from poetry and songs to the scenery of the borderlands. At first, he stammered over his words, but when the topic turned to military strategy and tactics, which he was good at, his eyes lit up like stars in the night sky. Watching him grow more animated as he spoke, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, I couldn't help but smile again. Only then did he belatedly realize his own excitement. His ears turning red once more, he clenched his fist and coughed lightly into his palm, quickly returning to his usual reserved self. From that day on, this young General Lu began to visit the Su mansion every few days without fail. Today, he would bring a box of freshly baked almond cookies. Tomorrow, a few camellia branches still glistening with morning dew. The day after, some exquisitely crafted little trinkets. Even though our engagement had already been settled, he still grew flustered and tongue-tied in my presence, constantly lowering his head to straighten his already neat robe after saying just a few words. Once, Ginkgo couldn't resist teasing him. Young General Lu never comes to our mansion empty-handed, does he? When he heard this, his hand trembled as he held his teacup. Spilling tea onto his robe, he panicked instantly, his ears turning scarlet. He stammered for a long time, then suddenly set the brocade box he was holding on the table and turned to rush out the door. I just remembered I have urgent matters to attend to at the military camp. I opened the brocade box, and inside lay a beautiful hairpin carved from white jade in the shape of a pear blossom. Beneath the hairpin was a piece of colored paper, on which was written neatly in elegant calligraphy, "The pear blossoms in my courtyard are in bloom. They are more beautiful than ever this year." I smiled as I traced the graceful characters with my fingertips, suddenly feeling that these quiet, ordinary days were surprisingly pleasant and charming. Days passed as usual, and the small gifts Lu Chen sent gradually filled my dressing table. That white jade pear blossom hairpin, the straw grasshopper, the colored paper with a little rabbit drawn on it. Each item reminded me of the way his ears would turn red when he handed them to me. One day, I went to the jewelry shop to pick up some newly ordered ornaments. On my way back, I took a shortcut and happened to pass by the side gate of the Eastern Palace's west courtyard. Suddenly, Wan Li's angry, flustered voice drifted out from behind the gate. "Didn't you say this rebirth would be foolproof? Why is Pei Heng so obsessed with Su Wanyue now?" At the word rebirth, I froze in my tracks and crept closer to listen. To my shock, a strange, mechanical voice suddenly echoed in the air. "Warning, favorability towards target Pei Heng continues to decline. Current favorability, 45%. If the mission fails again, the host will be permanently eliminated." Wan Li's voice trembled with fear and frustration. "That's impossible. In my last life, last reload consumed all points due to host's failure to achieve the Crown Princess ending. This is the final chance." My heart jolted violently. I took a few quiet steps back and slipped away as silently as I could. On my way back to the mansion, my heart was still pounding wildly. Strategy, mission, favorability, elimination. These bizarre words kept swirling around in my mind, though I couldn't fully understand their meaning. One thing was crystal clear: Wan Li had never truly loved Pei Heng. To her, this relationship had been nothing more than a mission she had to complete. How ridiculous! In my past life, my sincere, wholehearted love had been defeated by such a complete and utter lie. As soon as I stepped through the mansion gate, Ginkgo hurried over to greet me. "Miss, young General Lu is here. He's waiting for you in the back garden." I steadied my racing heart, composed my emotions, and then walked toward the back courtyard. When Lu Chen saw me, his face turned bright red. He pulled a gilded marriage certificate out of his arms. I wrote it 10 times. This is the neatest one. I took the certificate and unfolded it, barely holding back a laugh. This was not a proper marriage certificate at all. It was a small, personal prose poem. It recorded every little detail from the moment he had first seen me 3 years ago and fallen in love at first sight, to the pear blossoms we had admired together a few days earlier, filling 3 whole pages. At the end, he had drawn a round little rabbit, with the words "a vow to grow old together" written beside it. Young General Lu, I deliberately put on a serious expression. This is not how a marriage certificate is supposed to be written. The Ministry of Rights will never approve it if they see this. He panicked, reaching out in a hurry to take it back. Then I'll go back and rewrite it at once. No need. I carefully folded the certificate and tucked it into my sleeve, lifting my eyes to meet his bright, shining gaze. This marriage certificate, I like it very much. The date of my wedding to Lu Chen was set for the 6th day of the 6th lunar month, the exact same day as Pei Heng's wedding in the Eastern Palace. That day, I was in my room checking my dowry when a sudden commotion erupted outside the courtyard. "Su Wanyue," Pei Heng's voice rang out from the door. Thick with repressed anger, "Open the door." My fingers froze mid-movement. Before I could even stand up, the door was slammed open. Pei Heng stood in the doorway, reeking of alcohol, his eyes bloodshot with rage. Are you really going to marry that man surnamed Lu?" I took a step back instinctively. "Your Highness is drunk." Pei Heng's eyes lit up with hope. He strode forward in a few steps and grabbed my wrist. You're worried about me, aren't you?" I tried to pull my hand free, but I couldn't. My voice turned cold. "Your Highness, please show some respect." "Respect?" He let out a low, bitter laugh, his eyes swirling with a storm of emotions. "You never used to talk to me like this." "Let her go." Lu Chen's voice cut through the air, clear and steady. He stood in the corridor, his brows furrowed with a sharpness I had never seen in him before. Pei Heng narrowed his eyes, but instead of letting go, he pulled me closer to his chest. "Lu Chen, who do you think you are? Ordering around this crown prince?" Lu Chen's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. "My marriage to Wanyue has been registered with the Ministry of Rights. All the proper betrothal rituals have been completed. Wanyue is my fiancée. It is only right and proper for me to protect her." Pei Heng let out a cold, mocking laugh. "What is a mere piece of paper? If I go to father right now and ask him to annul this marriage, do you think it will still count?" Lu Chen's eyes darkened, but his voice remained calm and unyielding. "If your Highness insists on doing so, this humble general is willing to immediately request a posting to the border. I will trade my military merits for His Majesty's approval of this marriage." His words made it clear. Even if he had to go to the battlefield and stain the desert with his blood, he would protect this marriage at all costs. "Are you threatening me?" Pei Heng roared, his face twisted with fury. "What if I am?" Lu Chen retorted without flinching. Murderous rage flared in Pei Heng's eyes. The knuckles of Lu Chen's hand holding his sword turned white from the force of his grip. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, thick enough to cut with a knife. My gaze flickered between the two men. "Your Highness, may I speak to you alone for a moment?" Pei Heng froze for a second, then finally released my wrist. Lu Chen frowned at me, but I shook my head gently, signaling for him to trust me. He fell silent for a moment, then finally stepped out of the room, leaving only Pei Heng and me behind. The moment the door closed, the anger in Pei Heng's eyes faded a little, replaced by a complex, tangled emotion. "What do you want to say?" I looked straight into his eyes, my voice steady and clear. "Your Highness, do you still remember what you said to me in my past life, when you had your hands around my throat?" Pei Heng's entire body went rigid. The drunken haze in his eyes cleared instantly. "You said if you hadn't switched the name slips, Leah would have been my legitimate wife. Now, Your Highness, your wedding to Miss Wan is just around the corner. Your wish has finally been granted. What more could you possibly be dissatisfied with?" Pei Heng's face grew paler and paler. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. You also?" "Yes." I stared directly into his eyes, my voice unwavering. "I was reborn too, that is why. In this second chance at life, I refused to repeat the same mistakes again." Shock, remorse, and finally a look of almost unbearable agony flickered across Pei Heng's face. I don't know why, every time I get close to Wan Li, it feels like there's an invisible force controlling my thoughts. I can't control myself at all. That night I was drunk. I don't know what came over me. It was like I was possessed by something. I never meant to kill you. After you died, I regretted it for so long. I kept vigil by your spirit tablet for 7 whole days. That day, I got drunk, and when I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day of the lot drawing ceremony. Do you know how happy I was? I begged Father specially to let me choose a secondary consort as well. I filled that lot pot with nothing but your name slips. I don't know where it all went wrong. He rambled on, his words tumbling out faster and faster, his voice growing softer and softer as if he were explaining himself. Or perhaps confessing his sins. Finally, he took a step forward, grabbing my hand almost pleadingly. These past few days I've thought a lot. I've finally understood. I realized that even though I was grateful to Wan Li for saving my life, the person who has always been in my heart is you. Please give me another chance. I want to make it up to you. If you'll just agree, I'll go to Father right now and annul Wan Li's position. I'll make you my legitimate wife, when I ascend the throne. You will be my empress, the most honored woman in the entire kingdom. Your Highness, I have already died once. I pulled my hand free from his grasp, my fingertips gently brushing over my wrist, the same wrist he had sliced open to drain my blood in my past life. Some things can never be made up for, and some mistakes can never be undone, no matter how hard you try to atone for them. Pei Heng stood frozen in place, the light in his eyes dimming little by little until they were completely empty. Finally, he turned around in utter defeat, stumbled out of the room, and disappeared. Outside the door, Lu Chen still stood quietly in the corridor. When he saw me come out, he rushed forward in a single stride, grabbed my shoulders with both hands and looked me up and down anxiously. Wanyue, are you hurt anywhere? I shook my head, only to suddenly notice that his palms were completely soaked with sweat. I'm fine. I patted the back of his hand, comforting him softly. It's all over now. On the day of our grand wedding, a 10-li stretch of the main street was carpeted with red silk. I was dressed in a bright red wedding gown. The golden threaded phoenix embroidered on it shimmering brilliantly in the sunlight. The wedding sedan chair was halfway to its destination when a commotion suddenly erupted ahead. Are you? Pei Heng came galloping on horseback, dressed in a crimson wedding robe, with bloodshot eyes. He reined in his horse in front of the sedan chair, leaped down in one fluid motion, and blocked the path directly. Are you? Come out and see me. Lu Chen immediately pulled on the reins, drawing his sword and placing himself between Pei Heng and the sedan chair. Your Highness is supposed to be welcoming your bride at the Eastern Palace on your wedding day. What are you doing here? Pei Heng paid him no heed whatsoever, his eyes fixed unwaveringly on the sedan curtain. Are you? I know you can hear me. I lifted the sedan curtain, the beaded tassels of my phoenix coronet swaying gently. Your Highness, please return. Are you? I refuse to believe you can be so heartless. Pei Heng's Adam's apple bobbed, his voice thick with sobs. He took a step forward, only to be stopped by the hilt of Lu Chen's sword. Your Highness, I thought I made myself perfectly clear the other day. Please leave. With that, I was about to lower the sedan curtain. Are you? Wait, just look at this first. Pei Heng hastily pulled a booklet from his bosom, his voice trembling with emotion. The other day I told you that every time I got close to Wan Li, I felt like I couldn't control myself. Now I finally know why. I found these in her box yesterday. She's not even human, she's a monster. I took the booklet from him, and the 4 large characters emblazoned on the cover, *strategy record *, stared back at me. I flipped it open, and its pages were filled with dense notes. 7th day of the 2nd lunar month, deliberately fell into the water. Pei Heng's favorability plus 5%. 16th day of the 3rd lunar month, pretended to be bullied by Su Wanyue. Pei Heng's favorability plus 7%. 8th day of the 4th lunar month, deliberately drank spiked tea, triggering palpitations. Pei Heng stayed by my side all night to take care of me. Favorability plus 12%. Strategy, favorability. I suddenly recalled the strange words Wan Li had spoken to thin air that day. She schemed so hard to get close to me, to control me, all just to become my primary consort and complete her so-called mission. Pei Heng's voice was hoarse and broken. All those things I did to hurt you, they were never my true intention. Are you? Come away with me. I can give up the position of Crown Prince. I can give up everything. I only want you. I closed my eyes briefly, then tossed the booklet back into his arms. Your Highness, this changes nothing. Your Highness, a shrill cry of despair cut through the air. Ruan Li came stumbling and rushing over. Her hair was disheveled, her face streaked with blood and grime. Gone was the delicate, fragile look she usually wore. She looked more like a fugitive who had just escaped from prison. Your Highness, you promised me that I was the only one in your heart, that you would take care of me for the rest of your life. She lunged forward and grabbed Pei Heng's sleeve, tears streaming down her face. Please come back with me and marry me. If I fail this mission again, I'll be completely erased by the system. I'll really die. Pei Heng's eyes were filled with nothing but disgust and terror. He roughly shook her off him, shouting, "Get away from me, you monster!" Ruan Li stumbled backward, then suddenly broke into a maniacal laugh. "It's all your fault, Su Wanyue." She whipped a dagger out of her sleeve in a flash, her eyes blazing with madness. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have failed again and again. If I can't live, then I'll drag you down with me to hell." A cold glint flashed as the dagger stabbed straight toward me. "Are you?" In the blink of an eye, Pei Heng suddenly pushed Lu Chen aside and threw himself in front of me. The dagger sank deep into his chest, and blood instantly dyed his wedding robe an even brighter, more vivid shade of red. Pei Heng stumbled to his knees, but he still clung tightly to Ruan Li's wrist, preventing her from taking another step closer. He looked up at me, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. "Are you, in this life, I finally protected you?" Ruan Li stared at her blood-stained hands, then let out a blood-curdling scream. "No, system, give me one more chance. Please don't." Her body began to twist and contort, turning transparent before our eyes. Lu Chen pulled me behind him in an instant, drawing his sword with a sharp clang. "Evil spirit," Ruan Li's voice cut off abruptly, and her entire body dissolved into thin air like smoke, leaving only the blood-stained dagger clattering to the ground. Screams erupted all around us. Amidst the chaos, Pei Heng's hand slowly dropped, the light fading from his eyes bit by bit. Lu Chen stepped forward, covering my eyes with his warm palm. "Don't look," but I still saw it, the final shape his lips formed before he died. It was 3 words. "I'm sorry." 10 days later, Lu Chen and I held our grand wedding ceremony once again. In the wedding hall, he gently lifted my red veil, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I've finally married you." I raised my head, meeting his glistening eyes, and brushed the slightly reddened corners of his eyes with my fingertips. "Silly man." Later, we spent our lives in deep love, growing old together, blessed with a house full of children and grandchildren. The Eastern Palace got a new master, and the old stories faded into oblivion, never to be mentioned again. Now, let's hear the second story of the day. On the day when the Marquis of Pingan's mansion sent betrothal gifts to the Duke's mansion, the young Marquis Shenhuai arrived instead with a jade pendant, intent on breaking off our engagement. He had fallen in love with my concubine-born half-sister, Wan Yang. Kneeling before their parents, he declared that Wan Yang was already carrying his child, and that he would never marry anyone but her. The Marquis of Pingan beat him half to death. My father locked Wan Yang away in the ancestral hall. Shenhuai said to me, "You are the legitimate daughter of the Duke's mansion. Even if the engagement is broken off, you will still have a bright future ahead of you. But Wan Yang is different. She is a concubine-born daughter. If I don't marry her, she will have no way to survive in this world. There are so many concubine-born daughters in the capital. Are you going to marry them all?" I tore up the marriage certificate and threw it into the snow. "I grant you your wish." Later, Shenhuai came to regret his decision, kneeling in my courtyard and begging for my forgiveness. I dressed in my full princess regalia and said to him, "Clean up this courtyard at once. Don't get in the way of my journey to the palace to receive the imperial reward." The 8th day of the first lunar month, an extremely auspicious day, the Marquis and Marquise of Pingan led a procession to the Duke's mansion to present betrothal gifts. Gift-laden baskets covered with red silk piled up in the courtyard of the Duke's mansion, and my father and mother were beaming with satisfaction. I dressed myself neatly, and my nanny smiled and said, "The young lady has truly grown up, so dignified and graceful, and so beautiful. The young Marquis has truly found himself a treasure." I smiled shyly. Just as I was about to head to the front courtyard, my maid Paya came rushing in, out of breath. "Miss, it's terrible. The young Marquis is kneeling in the front courtyard, saying he wants to break off the engagement. The snow was falling heavily on the 8th day of the first lunar month. By the time I walked to the front courtyard, the ground was already covered with a thick blanket of white. Shenhuai was kneeling in the very center of the courtyard, looking completely out of place amidst the piles of betrothal gifts. Holding the jade pendant aloft in his hand, he said in a loud, clear voice, "Please forgive me, Duke and Duchess, I beg your pardon, but I cannot marry Chia. My heart already belongs to another, and I will never marry anyone but her. I implore you to consent to the annulment of our engagement." My father and mother sat in the main hall, their faces ashen with anger. The Marquis of Pingen flew into a rage, smashing his teacup to the ground. "You unfilial wretch! Do you know what day it is today, and you dare to say you want to break off the engagement? You have another woman in your heart. You and Chia have been betrothed since childhood, and now you suddenly claim you love someone else. Have you completely lost your mind?" The Marquise of Pingen covered her face with a handkerchief and burst into tears, clutching my mother's hand and apologizing profusely. "It's all my fault for failing to teach my son properly. I had no idea this scoundrel would dare to say such a thing today. Once the Marquis gets to the bottom of this, we will definitely give the Duke's mansion a proper explanation." Shenhuai remained completely unflustered, saying firmly, "Father, I simply cannot betray her. She has no one else to turn to but me. Please, father and mother, grant us your blessing." The Marquis of Pingen had been a military man for many years. He drew the whip he always carried with him and lashed it across Shenhuai's back. Blood soon began to seep through Shenhuai's clothes. A delicate, frail figure came running out from the backyard, throwing herself into Shenhuai's arms. "Why are you being so foolish? If something happens to you, what will I do?" "Wanyang." Shenhuai hugged her tightly. "Wanyang, why did you come out? I told you I would break off the engagement and marry you. I will never betray you. Who are ye? Even if I die today, it will all be worth it." The two star-crossed lovers clung tightly to each other, as if they were defying the entire world. The woman Shenhuai had fallen in love with turned out to be my concubine-born half-sister. Everyone was completely stunned. My mother stood up, pointing at Wanyang with trembling fingers. "Do you have any idea that the young Marquis was supposed to be your legitimate elder sister's future husband? How dare you? How could you possibly dare to do this?" Wanyang sobbed uncontrollably. Shenhuai held her in his arms and looked at my mother, saying earnestly, "Auntie, Wanyang and I are truly in love, unlike Chia, who excels at everything: poetry, music, calligraphy, painting. Unlike Chia, who is so elegant and poised in every way, like a perfect porcelain doll. Wanyang is the one who truly cares about me, who asks after my well-being. She is not just a cold, distant noble lady, she is the one who gives me everything I need. In my heart, I have long regarded Wanyang as my wife." After all, the two families were already planning to form an alliance through marriage. Changing the bride from the elder sister to the younger sister makes no difference at all. The Marquise of Pingen slapped him across the face. "You unfilial wretch, how dare you say such a thing? You call yourself a son of a noble family, yet you have no regard for Chia's reputation at all." My mother shouted in anger, "Guards, drag the second young lady down and lock her in the ancestral hall at once. I will never agree to this." Shenhuai threw his arms around Wanyang protectively. "Auntie, Wanyang is already carrying my child. I have no choice but to marry her." Clang. The pot of cymbidium orchids I was holding slipped from my hands and crashed to the ground. All eyes turned to me. This pot of cymbidium orchids had been a gift to me on my 15th birthday. After all these years of careful tending, it had finally produced flower buds, but now it lay shattered on the ground, broken into pieces, just like my engagement to him. Shenhuai looked at me with a guilty expression. "Sister Chia." But then he suddenly straightened his back, his voice firm. "Sister Chia, even though we have been betrothed since childhood, my feelings for you have always been nothing more than those between an elder brother and a younger sister. Now that we are about to get married, I cannot allow this to happen any longer. Sister, please agree to break off this engagement. The one I truly love is not you, it's Wanyang." I raised my eyes, meeting the look of deep affection and pain in my parents' eyes, and the expression of profound guilt in the Marquis and Marquise's eyes. The hem of my long white fox-fur cloak trailed on the snow-covered ground, like a blooming white plum blossom. I walked slowly toward him, step by step, I finally came to a stop in front of the two kneeling figures. Brother Huai, if you do not love me, I have nothing to say. But why did you have to wait until the very day the betrothal gifts were presented to say this? How could you do this, completely disregarding the honor and dignity of the Duke's mansion? Do you think that matters of marriage between sons and daughters are just a joke? Do you understand what is at stake here? You dismiss me as a boring noble lady and break off the engagement with a single sentence, but do you have any idea how difficult life will be for a woman who has been rejected in this way? You know exactly how hard it will be for me, yet you still chose to do this, out of pure selfishness. You knew perfectly well that this matter could have been resolved in a much better way, but instead, you chose the most direct and cruel method. With the wedding just around the corner, you announce that Wan Yang is already pregnant, forcing our parents to agree to this marriage. Is that not the truth? A flicker of guilt crossed Shen Huai's face, but it was gone in an instant. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with conviction. Sister Chia, you are the legitimate daughter of the Duke's mansion. Even if the engagement is broken off, you will still have a bright future ahead of you. But Wan Yang is different. She is a concubine-born daughter. If I don't marry her, she will have no way to survive in this world. Wan Yang knelt on the ground, clutching the hem of my cloak tightly. Elder sister, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. If you want to beat me or kill me, please direct all your anger at me. I know my status is lowly, and that the young Marquis is far beyond my reach, but when I first saw him, it was like seeing a god. He is so kind, so good to me, I couldn't help but fall in love with him. I had no choice. Elder sister, I beg you, please forgive us. I wrenched the hem of my cloak free from her grasp. Taking a step back, I pulled the marriage certificate out of my pouch, tore it to shreds, and threw the pieces at Shen Huai's feet. A man like you is not worthy of my hand in marriage. From this day forward, your life is yours, and mine is mine. We shall have nothing more to do with each other. Shen Huai was punched so hard by my father that he spat out a mouthful of blood. Then the Marquis of Ping'an ordered him to kneel in our courtyard, and he was not allowed to get up until I had forgiven him. After the Marquis of Ping'an's family left, Shen Huai knelt in the courtyard. Wan Yang cried her heart out, insisting on kneeling with him. When it came to matters in the inner quarters, no one knew them better than the women of the household. For Wan Yang to pull off such a scheme, she could not have done it alone, and in this Duke's mansion, there was only one person who would help her, Mistress Yu, Wan Yang's birth mother. Shortly after the Marquis of Ping'an's entourage departed, father turned around and went with mother to Mistress Yu's chambers. Mistress Yu seemed to have been expecting them. She remained remarkably calm, smiling as she said, "What is it you wish to ask of me? Husband, I will admit to everything. But tell me, what sin have I committed? I have only done what any mother should do. A mother must plan far ahead for her child's future. Besides me, who else would truly look out for Wan Yang's interests?" Mother flew into a rage. From the day Wan Yang was born, have I ever wronged her in the least when it came to food, clothing, or other provisions? How could you teach her to ruin Chia's marriage? Mistress Yu laughed coldly. Madam, besides a birth mother, who would ever truly have her best interests at heart, you betrothed the eldest young lady to a young marquis. Yet the matches you found for Wan Yang were all sons of low-ranking officials, 6th or 7th rank at best. Tell me, is there no difference between the two? Father slammed his teacup to the ground, shattering it. Wan Yang is a concubine-born daughter. Who would take her in as their wife if she sets her sights on a noble family? Mistress Yu smoothed her hair ornaments leisurely. There's no need to worry about that anymore. The young marquis has taken a fancy to her. Mistress Yu dared to act so boldly only because she relied on father's usual favor, thinking she could gloss over this incident and get away with a light punishment. Mother stood up abruptly, her voice icy with anger. A mother must plan far ahead for her child's future. Is that it? Very well. Then, if the Duke's mansion loses a daughter with a tarnished reputation, it is no great tragedy. The Duke's mansion will still stand tall and walk with integrity. Others will even praise us for our strict family discipline. Right now, I can go to the ancestral hall and bring her a bowl of poison. Mistress Yu shot to her feet, her face contorted with rage. Wan Yang is the Marquis's daughter. How dare you? Mother's eyes blazed with fury. I was married into this family in a grand sedan chair carried by 8 men. I dare to do it, and you can see if the Marquis dares to say a single word against me. With that, she turned and strode away. Behind her came Mistress Yu's hysterical wails and father's angry shouts. My marriage was a matter that concerned the honor and mutual interests of two great noble families. A marriage alliance between aristocratic clans was no trivial matter. How could a mere concubine possibly understand that? All she cared about was whether the groom was wealthy and of high status. That very night, Mistress Yu was sent to the family's countryside estate in a hurry, with not a single personal maid to attend to her, only a rough, elderly servant woman. I went to the ancestral hall to see Wanyang. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Elder sister, where is the young Marquis? Is he still kneeling? Can you forgive him? If you want to blame someone, blame me instead. I looked down at her coldly. He has committed a grave offense. If I do not forgive him, he must keep kneeling. Wanyang's voice trembled as she spoke. Elder sister, it is not his fault that he does not love you. Why must you torment yourself over a man who does not care for you? You are the legitimate daughter of the Duke's mansion. There is no shortage of men who would be honored to marry you. Why must you fight with me over him? Elder sister, please, can you give Huai to me? Paya, my maid, spat disdainfully. What audacity, second young lady. How dare you say such shameless words? Wanyang straightened her back and brushed a strand of hair from her face, her expression defiant. But I am carrying the blood of the Marquis of Ping'an now, even if they dislike my lowly birth. They have no choice but to marry me. I looked at her calmly and said, the Marquis of Ping'an's wife has already made it clear you will never be his legitimate wife, only a concubine, however. A daughter of the Duke's mansion will never be a concubine to anyone. Therefore, you have only two choices. First, drink the abortifacient and terminate the pregnancy. After that, father and mother will naturally find a good family for you to marry into, and you will still be recognized as a daughter of the Duke's mansion. Wanyang clutched her stomach tightly, her face turning pale with fear. Impossible. How dare you do this? This is the young Marquis's child. He will never let you get away with it. I continued in a steady voice. Second choice, if you insist on entering the Marquis of Ping'an's residence as a concubine, you must voluntarily request to be removed from the family tree. From that day onward, the Duke's mansion will have no daughter by the name of Li Wana. Wanyang screamed in fury, her eyes blazing with resentment. Why can I not marry the young Marquis as his legitimate wife? Why is my status not good enough? We are both father's daughters. Why can you have it all, but I cannot? I fixed her with a sharp gaze and said, because such is the way of the world. You are a concubine-born daughter, yet since childhood, you have never been forced to study the qin, painting, or calligraphy diligently. You have been free to play and neglect your etiquette lessons, with nothing to do but enjoy yourself and have fun. But as for me, from the moment I came of age, I have had to study from the moment I opened my eyes in the morning until I went to bed at night. Every word I spoke, every move I made, had to be worthy of a young lady from a great family. You have never seen the hardships I endured. All you ever saw were my beautiful clothes and expensive jewelry. You never witnessed the painstaking efforts I put into my studies, or the heavy responsibility I bear for the family's marriage alliance. In your eyes, the only thing that matters is love and romance, but in the face of the glory and honor of our family, those things are utterly meaningless. Mother hated Wanyang deeply for what she had done. She gave father two choices, either remove Wanyang from the family tree, or give her the abortifacient. Father went to the ancestral hall to see Wanyang. When he emerged, his face was ashen with despair. A servant who had been guarding the ancestral hall quietly told Paya that Wanyang had sworn that she would rather die than give up on marrying the young Marquis. In the end, father's heart turned cold and hard. The next day, the Duke's mansion held a ceremony in the ancestral hall, and Li Wana's name was officially and completely struck from the Li family's genealogy. That night, a plain, unadorned pink sedan chair was carried out through the side gate of the Duke's mansion and quietly entered the residence of the Marquis of Ping'an. News of my broken engagement quickly spread throughout the capital. Everyone was talking about how the young Marquis, whom all the noble young ladies in the capital were vying to marry, had rejected the legitimate daughter of the Duke's mansion in favor of her concubine-born half-sister. Behind my back, no one knew how many people were laughing at me and speculating about the reason. After all, I, Li Chia, the renowned legitimate daughter of the Duke's mansion, known for my poise, grace, and scholarly knowledge, whose bearing had even been praised by the imperial tutors in the palace, had been publicly jilted by my fiancé. But the very next day, another piece of news spread like wildfire through the capital. Wan Yang had been disowned by the Duke's mansion, and the Marquis of Ping'an had only taken her in as a concubine, not a legitimate wife. On the third day after Wan Yang was carried into the Marquis of Ping'an's residence as a concubine, she actually dared to come to the Duke's mansion with Shen Huai to perform the traditional 3-day post-wedding visit to her parents' home, but as soon as they stepped down from their carriage, they were stopped by the servants at the main gate. The head servant spoke politely but firmly. "Young Marquis, the Duke and Duchess have given explicit orders. This mansion has only one young lady, and no other daughters. Where did this custom of a post-wedding visit come from? Furthermore, the Duke and Duchess are not at home today, so there is no one to receive the two of you." Wan Yang raised her chin arrogantly, her voice shrill with anger. "Open your eyes and look at me. I am the second young lady of this mansion. It is my right to return home for the 3-day visit after my marriage. How dare you stop me? When my father comes back, he will have your head for this. Now get out of my way at once." The servant kept his head bowed, his tone unyielding. "Madam, young Marquis, I am only following orders from my superiors. I cannot obey your command to step aside." Shen Huai, seeing Wan Yang being humiliated, felt a surge of pity for her. He stepped forward. His eyes filled with dissatisfaction as he looked at the servant. "Is your eldest young lady at home? I wish to see her." The servant let out a cold laugh and replied, "Oh, I'm sorry, but in the absence of the master and mistress of the house, our eldest young lady does not receive any male visitors from outside the family." Wan Yang let out a shriek of anger. "But she is my elder sister. Why can't I see her?" With that, she pushed the servant aside roughly and tried to force her way into the mansion, only to be stopped by my voice. "Stop right there." I stepped out from inside the gate, my gaze cold and sharp as I looked at her. I fixed her with a piercing stare and said, "Tell me, what place is this, and who are you, to dare to trespass into the residence of the Duke of this realm?" When Wan Yang saw me, she quickly composed herself and rushed forward, her eyes welling up with tears. "Elder sister, Huai and I have come today to pay our respects to father and mother on our 3-day post-wedding visit." I glanced at the two of them disdainfully and said, "Li Wanna, on the day you were disowned by the family, you swore that you would have no further ties with the Duke's mansion for the rest of your life. It seems you have already forgotten that. Let me remind you once more, you are no longer a member of this family. If you wish to visit here in the future, you must first send a formal invitation. Do you not understand even this basic rule of etiquette, or does the young Marquis not understand it either?" Wan Yang's eyes filled with tears as she fell to her knees in front of the mansion gate, her voice trembling with sobs. "Elder sister, why must you make things so difficult for me? I only want to see father." "Elder sister, are you still angry with me for taking Huai away from you? If you are still angry, then you can beat me. Scold me, I will not resist in the least. Please, elder sister, just let me see father. I beg you." As she knelt there weeping, the passers-by on the street all stopped to watch the spectacle, whispering among themselves. Shen Huai rushed forward to help Wan Yang up, his face dark with anger as he glared at me. "It was I who fell in love with Wanna. I was the one who pursued her first, and I was the one who broke off the engagement with you. The fault lies entirely with me. If you are angry, direct your anger at me. Why must you torment a weak, helpless woman like Wanna?" My nanny stepped forward from the side, positioning herself protectively in front of me. Her voice was cold and cutting as she said, "Young Marquis, has your kneeling punishment not been long enough for you to forget the great wrong you have committed? Or has this madam forgotten her own status as a mere concubine?" Wan Yang threw herself to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "Nanny, you are elder sister's wet nurse. Please, speak a word for me. Help me get into the mansion to see father. I only want to fulfill my filial duty as a daughter." My nanny looked down at her with disgust and said, "If you had even an ounce of filial piety left in you, you would not be kneeling here at the gate of the Duke's mansion, disgracing our family name in front of the entire city. Young Marquis, have you no shame? Are you trying to trample the Duke's mansion's honor into the dirt?" This was turning into a farce, but I had no desire to stay and play my part in front of all these onlookers. I turned my face away and ordered the head servant, "Go to the residence of the Marquis of Ping'an at once and ask his wife this question." Why is her son parading around the capital with his concubine, coming to the Duke's mansion to humiliate us and insult our family's dignity? Does she wish to declare enmity between our two families? Then I turned to the servants and said in a clear, firm voice, "Close the main gate. If anyone dares to force their way in, report them to the authorities at once, treat them as vagrants trespassing on private property, and drive them out with force. If any trouble arises, I will take full responsibility and answer to the authorities myself." Before the heavy wooden gate closed completely, I leaned forward slightly and spoke in a low, icy voice that only Wan Yang could hear. "If you want your mother to live a peaceful life at the countryside estate, then never again mention that you were once a daughter of the Duke's mansion. Otherwise," when the Marquis of Pingan's wife heard what had happened, she was absolutely livid. The Marquis of Pingan's family had become the laughingstock of the entire capital. In a fit of rage, she ordered Wan Yang to kneel in the Buddhist hall for an entire day and copy Buddhist scriptures for a month, saying it would help calm her mind and accumulate blessings for the child in her womb. I thought that this punishment would teach Wan Yang a lesson, and that she would finally settle down and behave herself as a concubine in the Marquis of Pingan's residence. But I was wrong. I had severely underestimated her shamelessness and ambition. When Paya returned from going out that afternoon, she was so angry that her face was flushed. She told me that storytellers in tea houses all over the capital were now telling tales about the young Marquis and me. Although they did not use our real names, anyone who heard the stories would immediately know that they were about me. In the storytellers' tales, I was portrayed as a cruel, scheming legitimate daughter of a noble family, a woman who had mistreated her innocent, kind-hearted concubine-born half-sister and faked her affection for her fiancé, the young Marquis. The tales even hinted that I had been carrying on secret liaisons with other men behind the young Marquis's back. Meanwhile, Wan Yang was depicted as a poor, virtuous, and beautiful young woman who had fallen in love with the young Marquis at first sight. Together, they had overcome countless obstacles and triumphed over the evil legitimate daughter. With the young Marquis finally breaking off his engagement and marrying his true love, the poor, wronged concubine-born daughter, the story was told in such a vivid and touching way that every day, a steady stream of young ladies and noble wives flocked to the tea house to listen. Some were so captivated that they came back to hear it over and over again. A little inquiry was all it took for everyone to put two and two together and figure out who the characters in the story really were. Yet instead of condemning them, everyone rushed to sympathize with Wan Yang and the young Marquis. Paya went to listen to the story once and came back absolutely furious, tears streaming down her face as she told me what she had heard. I ordered my men to secretly investigate the matter. I had always known that Wan Yang hated me, but I never imagined that Shen Huai was helping her behind the scenes. My father was so enraged that he grabbed his sword, vowing to go and kill Shen Huai. I quickly stopped him. In matters like this, since they did not name us directly, how can we be foolish enough to go and admit it ourselves? My mother nodded in agreement. For this kind of insult, we must repay it in kind. Chia, what do you plan to do? Of course I intended to get my revenge. After all, even though I was just a young lady, I had an excellent memory for grudges. I took out a banknote worth 1,000 taels of silver and hired a traveling opera troupe. I had them write a new opera script overnight and rehearse it at once. The very next day, the capital's largest theatre, Lichuan Garden, premiered a new play titled *A Beauty's Fall from Grace*. The play told the story of a concubine-born daughter from an aristocratic family who was consumed by jealousy of her legitimate elder sister, jealous of her beauty, jealous of her talents, jealous of everything she had. The concubine-born daughter schemed to seduce her elder sister's fiancé, using her wiles to charm him until he was completely infatuated with her. She soon became pregnant with his child, and he, blinded by his obsession, cast aside the friendship between their two families and all sense of decency, breaking off his engagement with the legitimate daughter to be with the concubine-born woman, vowing to spend the rest of his life with her. In the end, however, thanks to the concubine-born daughter's endless scheming and constant troublemaking, she lost her child. After marrying the young man, their lives descended into chaos, and she finally reaped what she had sown. Every new play staged at Lichuan Garden was a sellout, and this one was no exception. The play struck a deep chord in the hearts of every legitimate wife in the capital. Many saw their own struggles reflected in it, and they all gnashed their teeth in anger, hating the concubine-born daughter in the play with a passion. Within days of the play's premiere, it was the talk of the town. Any noble lady or wife who had not seen it had nothing to talk about with others. It was at this moment that Shen Huai came to my door. He stood in the courtyard, staring at me with a face full of rage. "Chia, I never thought you would be such a cruel person. How dare you hire an opera troupe to stage such a slanderous play? Are you trying to drive Wan Yang to her death?" I shot back at him without hesitation. "When you and Wan Yang had the storyteller spin your little tale, did you ever stop to think about my situation? Did you care whether I lived or died?" Shen Huai's face turned red with embarrassment. "Wan Yang is just a child at heart. She didn't know any better, it was just a joke. But you are a well-bred noble lady, always so sensible, so graceful and dignified. Why are you being so petty about this? Do you know that Wan Yang is pregnant?" When she heard about the play, she cried all day long and had a miscarriage scare. "Go apologize to her, and we can put this whole ugly business behind us." I looked at him as if he were an idiot. What kind of nonsense was this? Their scheming to ruin my reputation was just childishness, but my retaliation was petty, and I was supposed to apologize to them. Before I could even open my mouth to retort, my father walked over and heard Shen Huai's words. He flew into a rage. "Young Marquis, our Duke's mansion is not honored enough to receive a guest like you. Do not bother to visit us again in the future, leave at once." He ordered his servants to throw Shen Huai out of the mansion. Shen Huai was thrown out of the front gate in utter disgrace. He shouted loudly from outside, "Duke, how can you be so biased? Wan Yang is having a miscarriage scare right now. Do you not feel the slightest bit of pity for your own daughter?" No sooner had he finished speaking than a basin of foot-washing water was poured over his head, soaking him to the skin. Paya slammed the basin down on the ground and shouted, "What kind of shameless rascal is making such a racket out here? Are you gatekeepers all dead? Hurry up and chase this stray dog away. Our young lady has been suffering from a terrible headache and needs her afternoon nap." The gatekeepers replied in unison. At once, they picked up their brooms and began sweeping the front steps, clearing away the dirty water and dirt along with Shen Huai. The story of the young Marquis of Ping'an and his concubine spread throughout the capital like wildfire, becoming a household topic of gossip within a month. Once again, the Marquise of Ping'an demonstrated her extraordinary skills as the matriarch of a noble family. She wasted no time in arranging a new marriage for Shen Huai to the eldest daughter of the great general's mansion, a young lady who had practiced martial arts since childhood, who could mount a horse and fight the barbarians as easily as she could sit by a window and embroider flowers. Shen Huai was unwilling to agree to the marriage, but the Marquise of Ping'an only said to him, "If you refuse this marriage, then take your concubine and get out of my Marquis's mansion at once. The reputation of the Marquis of Ping'an's mansion will not be ruined by your foolishness." No matter how much Wan Yang whimpered and cried, throwing tantrums and playing the role of the poor, wronged victim in the backyard, the marriage between the great general's mansion and the Marquis of Ping'an's mansion was quickly finalized, with the wedding set to take place in 2 months' time. Desperate to secure her position in the mansion, Wan Yang resorted to underhanded tactics. On the very night of Shen Huai's wedding to his new wife, she took a dose of medicine that caused her to suffer from severe abdominal pain in the middle of the night. She then sent her maid to the bridal chamber to beg Shen Huai to come and see her. "Young Marquis, it's terrible. Concubine WN is rolling around on the bed in agonizing pain. Please come and see her at once." The little maid burst into tears, feigning panic. Wan Yang had been counting on Shen Huai's deep affection for her and her pregnancy to make him rush to her side, humiliating his new bride and proving his devotion to her. But what she had not counted on was that the people from the great general's mansion were not to be trifled with. The new bride's personal maid stood guard at the courtyard gate and ordered the servants, "Tonight is the young Marquis's wedding night. Who dares to be so insolent as to come here making a racket? Gag her and drag her away to be flogged 10 times. Teach her a lesson she will never forget." Wan Yang's maid was dragged away, gagged, unable to even utter a single word of pleading for help. By the time they finally managed to send for a doctor, it was already too late. Wan Yang had miscarried a fully formed male fetus. When Shen Huai finally arrived at her courtyard, Wan Yang threw herself into his arms, sobbing pitifully, "Huai, our baby is gone. Why didn't you come to me? I was in such terrible pain. Why are you so cruel to me?" The young Marquis's new wife stood calmly by the side and said in a cold, clear voice, who was in charge of waiting on concubine WN, "Drag them all out and flog them 50 times. Concubine WN was suffering from abdominal pain, yet instead of sending for a doctor at once, they ran to fetch the young Marquis. Is he a physician? They have completely bungled this matter of the utmost importance, the continuation of the family line. What punishment do they deserve for this dereliction of duty? Why did concubine WN suddenly suffer from such severe abdominal pain? What did the doctor say? Could it be that someone tried to harm her? This matter must be thoroughly investigated at once." The young Marquis's wife acted with decisive efficiency. After a few lashes of the whip, the servants could no longer bear the pain and confessed everything. It was Wan Yang herself who had added abortifacient herbs to her own pregnancy tonic, thinking that a small dose would only make her feel a little unwell and thus force Shen Huai to come to her side. She had never imagined that it would accidentally cause her to miscarry her fully formed baby boy. Shen Huai stared at her in disbelief, no longer willing to defend her. "Why would you do such a thing?" The young Marquis's wife covered her nose with a handkerchief, a look of disgust on her face. "Do I even need to ask? It was all for the sake of fighting for your affection. Of course, she wanted to lure you away from your wedding chamber on your wedding night. To show everyone how special she was to you, how much you doted on her, to give me a deliberate snub. Young Marquis, I have read plenty of storybooks. These kinds of underhanded tactics are nothing new to me." Shen Huai looked at Wan Yang in utter shock, his voice trembling with anger. "When did you become so scheming, so heartless and cruel? That baby in your womb was my own flesh and blood, and you killed him." Wan Yang cried her heart out. But without her child to use as leverage and because of her endless scheming and troublemaking, she quickly fell out of favor in the backyard of the Marquis's mansion. To make matters worse, Shen Huai was still completely infatuated with his new bride, and he soon forgot all about Wan Yang, leaving her to rot away in the cold, lonely confines of her courtyard. I had no interest in paying any more attention to their sordid little drama, for another winter had arrived. As the new year drew near, heavy snow began to fall once again on the capital city. The young ladies of the capital were overjoyed at the prospect of hosting snow-viewing banquets, composing poems, and drinking fine wine, a favorite winter pastime among the nobility. But I heard that the heavy snow had collapsed many houses in the slum areas outside the city walls, leaving countless common people homeless. They were forced to take shelter in temples and abandoned, dilapidated buildings outside the city. Shivering in the bitter cold, I opened my jewelry box and counted the money inside. There were still more than 2,000 taels of silver in banknotes. I took them all out and gave them to the steward, instructing him to set up soup kitchens in the name of the Duke's mansion on the outskirts of the city to provide food and relief to the homeless refugees. I put on thick winter clothes and wrapped myself in a warm cloak. Going out to the slums outside the city in person to oversee the relief efforts, word of our soup kitchens had not yet spread widely, so the Duke's mansion was the first aristocratic family to provide relief to the refugees. A long line of people queued up silently to receive bowls of hot porridge. Many of the elderly and children were dressed in thin cotton-padded jackets that offered little protection against the bitter wind and snow. Tears streamed down my face at the sight of their suffering. When I returned to the Duke's mansion, I immediately began sending out invitations to all the noble ladies I knew in the capital. I took out all my own jewelry and organized a charity sale, informing them that all the money raised would be used to buy warm cotton-padded clothes and quilts for the homeless refugees. Although these noble ladies were used to a life of luxury and indulgence, they all had kind hearts. Together, they donated several thousand taels of silver. I used the money to buy large quantities of warm clothes and thick quilts, which were then delivered to the refugees on the outskirts of the city. Inspired by our example, more and more aristocratic families in the capital soon followed suit, setting up their own soup kitchens on the outskirts of the city. Gradually, the situation began to improve. Even the Marquis of Pingan's mansion set up a soup kitchen, and to my surprise, it was Wan Yang who was put in charge of it. Shen Huai stood by her side at the soup kitchen, listening with pride as the common people praised the Marquis of Pingan for his kindness and complimented him on having such a beautiful and compassionate wife. It seemed that Wan Yang had managed to win back Shen Huai's favor and had once again established herself as a force to be reckoned with in the backyard of the Marquis's mansion, so much so that she was even allowed to represent the family in this public act of charity. Wan Yang raised her head proudly, a broad smile on her face. The golden hairpin in her hair glittered brightly in the sunlight as she basked in the praise of the crowd. When Shen Huai saw me standing at our own soup kitchen nearby, he deliberately walked over to talk to me. "Sister Chia," he stared at me for a long moment, then murmured softly, "You look just as beautiful today as you always have." I replied to him with polite, deliberate distance, "Young Marquis, are you here to help with the soup kitchen as well? Has your wife accompanied you?" Acts of charity and benevolence like this were generally the domain of the legitimate wife of a noble family after all, who would not want to earn such a praiseworthy reputation. My question was like a slap in the face, jolting him back to his senses. He looked embarrassed and stammered, "My wife has just been diagnosed with childbirth. That is why she has entrusted the management of the soup kitchen to Wan Yang." "I see," I said with a faint smile. "Congratulations, young Marquis. It seems you are going to be a father again soon." Just then, Wan Yang walked over to us, linking her arm through Shen Huai's possessively. "Husband, what are you and Sister Chia talking about?" I would not dare to call myself the elder sister of such a distinguished lady. I replied coolly, my eyes sweeping over her. "I was just congratulating the young Marquis on his upcoming fatherhood. When the time comes, the Duke's mansion will surely send a generous gift to celebrate the occasion." Alas, the young Marquis really should have become a father a long time ago, if it were not for. I trailed off deliberately, then looked at them with a look of feigned guilt. Oh my goodness, did I say something I should not have? Wan Yang's face turned bright red with rage, and she snapped at me, "It is still better than being an old maid who cannot even find a man willing to marry her." I laughed softly, my tone dripping with sarcasm. I would rather have one perfect peach than a whole basket of rotten apricots. And since when did becoming a man's concubine count as marriage? How amusing. My sharp, mocking words were enough to anger both of them, and they stormed off in a huff. But trouble soon came to the Marquis of Ping'an's soup kitchen. The very next day, dozens of refugees who had received porridge from their soup kitchen began to suffer from severe diarrhea. Doctors from the Jisheng Hall examined them and concluded that they had eaten spoiled, contaminated food. With so many cases of diarrhea breaking out among the refugees, the local authorities grew concerned that it might be a cholera outbreak and launched a thorough investigation at once. The results of the investigation shocked everyone. It was revealed that Wan Yang, the concubine in charge of the soup kitchen, had embezzled the money allocated by the Marquis's mansion to buy rice for the porridge. In order to save money and line her own pockets, she had ordered her maids to mix rotten, moldy rice into the porridge served to the refugees. The news caused an uproar throughout the capital. The emperor was furious when he heard about it and severely reprimanded the Marquis of Ping'an for engaging in such hypocritical acts of charity. More concerned with saving money and polishing his family's reputation than with actually helping the suffering refugees, which had only served to make the people resentful and angry. In stark contrast, the emperor showered me with praise for being the first to set up soup kitchens and donate money to buy warm clothes for the refugees. He commended my parents for raising such a kind-hearted and virtuous daughter. The very next day, gifts from the empress arrived at the Duke's mansion. Since I had donated all my own jewelry to the charity sale, the empress sent me a large collection of exquisite jewelry crafted by the Imperial Palace workshops, pieces of unparalleled beauty and craftsmanship. The emperor even went so far as to bestow upon me the title of Princess of Anning. With such a magnificent imperial endorsement, all the malicious gossip and slander that had once surrounded me vanished without a trace. Once again, matchmakers began flocking to the gates of the Duke's mansion in droves, eager to arrange a marriage for the newly titled Princess of Anning. By imperial decree, I was bestowed the title of princess. According to court etiquette, I had to dress in the regalia of a princess and enter the palace to offer my thanks. Mother and my nanny helped me get dressed. Soon, I would be accompanying father and mother to the palace to express my gratitude to the emperor. Paya came to whisper in my ear that the young Marquis had arrived and was kneeling in the front courtyard, insisting on seeing me. I considered for a moment, then went to meet him. He was kneeling in the very same spot where he had knelt when breaking off our engagement the year before, but this time, His expression was filled with deep, heartfelt remorse. "Sister Chia," he said, looking up at me, "only now do I realize how terribly wrong I was. Only now do I understand what a true lady of noble birth is: poised, educated, and virtuous. Sister, I was wrong. Ever since I took those women into my household, my backyard has been in constant chaos, filled with endless bickering and scheming. The Marquis of Ping'an's residence has become a place of utter disorder. I cannot even bear to return home. Chia, I will divorce my wife. I will beg the emperor to grant me a marriage to you, for the rest of my life. I only wish to spend my days with you." I let out a soft laugh. "You must be joking, young Marquis." He knelt even more earnestly, lifting his head to gaze at me with pleading eyes. "I am deadly serious. Whatever makes you think," I replied coldly, "that I would ever look twice at a man like you? When you broke off our engagement last year, I told you plainly that you were not worthy of me. And now I am a princess of the realm far beyond your reach, young Marquis. I suggest you go back home and stay with your wife and concubines." With that, I turned and walked away. The long, trailing hem of my scarlet princess robe glided over the snow-covered ground beside him, blazing bright red, searing his eyes like a flame. I ordered the servants, "Clear this courtyard at once. Do not let anyone block my way to the palace to receive the imperial reward." The snow was falling heavily, but I loved it, for my future, like the world blanketed in fresh snow, was clean and bright. The first time I laid eyes on Wanna was in the small garden of the Duke's mansion. When she saw me, she looked like a frightened fawn, her eyes wide and innocent. Then she tilted her head to look at me, blushing shyly as she said, "I know who you are my future brother-in-law." She broke into a sweet, clear laugh, two dimples forming on her cheeks. "My name is Wanna. I am the second young lady of the Duke's mansion, but I am not like my elder sister. I am a concubine-born daughter." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. I had never met a woman so lively and carefree before. All the noble ladies I knew were like Chia, smiling without showing their teeth, moving with quiet composure, skilled at brewing exquisite tea, painting stunning landscapes, and playing melodious music on the qin, yet they all seemed cut from the same mold, dull and tedious. I began to frequent the Duke's mansion. After paying my respects to Sister Chia, I would go to play by the lake in the back garden, where I always ran into Wanna. She loved to laugh, loved to chase butterflies, and loved to listen to me tell stories about the outside world. She would always say, her eyes shining with longing, "Brother Huai, I so want to go out and see the world." I brought her all sorts of trinkets, each one making her laugh with delight. The day her kite accidentally landed in my arms, my heart fell for her completely. I held her in my embrace and kissed her, promising her that I would take responsibility for her. I swore that I would break off my engagement to Chia and marry her. She trembled in my arms, whispering that father would surely beat her to death if he found out, but for the sake of my reputation, she begged me not to tell anyone. She was willing to keep our secret and bear this hardship alone. My heart ached for her. Such a sweet, obedient girl, she deserved to be protected. And I was determined to be the one to protect her. On the day when the Marquis of Ping'an's family was to send betrothal gifts to the Duke's mansion, I made my decision and announced that I was breaking off my engagement to Chia. It had been a plan I had hatched together with Wanna. She had said that by then, the wedding date would already be set, and to save face, the Duke's mansion would have to send a daughter to marry me. It would make no difference to them whether it was the elder sister or the younger one. I endured my father's whipping and the Duke's furious wrath. I knelt in the courtyard of the Duke's mansion for an entire day and night, and I never once regretted it. I was determined to marry Wanna. As I watched the broken orchid vase lying at Sister Chia's feet, I knew I had wronged her deeply, but she was simply too dull for me. I did not want to spend my entire life trapped in such a tedious existence. And most importantly, Wanna was carrying my child. When she had told me that night, we had lain together, imagining how happy we would be once we were married and raising our child. Chia had torn up the marriage certificate and agreed to end our engagement. I knew she had always been a proud woman, she would never look back at me. But my mother refused to let Wanna become my legitimate wife. She could only be a concubine, and the Duke's mansion, cruel and heartless as they were, had struck Wanna's name from their family tree, leaving her with no home to return to. Everything had turned out nothing like we had planned. Wanna had become a woman consumed by suspicion and jealousy. She had paid storytellers to compose a tale and spread it in the tea houses, pinning all the blame for our broken engagement on Chia. By the time I found out about it, the story was already being whispered about in every street and alley in the capital. Helpless, I had no choice but to use my connections to try to hush it up, but she had only ended up making things worse, like trying to steal a chicken and losing the rice instead. Chia had turned our story into a play and had it performed at the Lichuan Courtyard, the most famous theatre in the city. The Marquis of Ping'an's family had been utterly disgraced. In a rage, my mother had quickly arranged another marriage for me, threatening to kick me out of the mansion if I refused. I had no choice but to placate Wanna, telling her that even if I married someone else, she would always be the only one I loved. On the night of my wedding to my new wife, I learned the truth. Wanna had deliberately miscarried our child in her desperate bid for my undivided attention. Wanna was no longer the sweet, innocent girl I had fallen in love with. She had become a scheming, jealous woman, willing to do anything to get what she wanted. Even when she had set up a soup kitchen to do charitable deeds, she had embezzled the silver meant for the poor, serving them spoiled food that left countless refugees vomiting and suffering from diarrhea. The emperor had furiously reprimanded my father, nearly stripping our family of its title and fiefdom. Wanna's constant quarrels with my wife had eventually led to disaster. During a bitter argument, my wife had suffered a miscarriage due to extreme anger and stress. My mother had been so enraged that she had fainted on the spot. I was consumed by a deep, unshakable regret. I knelt before Sister Chia, begging her to forgive me, and there she stood, beautiful, radiant, dressed in the magnificent regalia of a princess. She looked down at me with eyes that held not a trace of pity. "Young Marquis," she said, her voice cold and clear, "it is too late. You are not worthy of me." She was right. I was not worthy of her. She now had a bright, promising future ahead of her. She had always been confident and self-assured. I alone had been blind and foolish, too blinded by my own stupidity to see the truth. From that day onward, I would never be worthy of her again.